Parents should remember that the pandemic will come to an end, and everything they do during this time will be reviewed. It will be brought to a court's attention. And I've got to tell you, I've got to imagine that if a court thinks that one parent was trying to use the system and play off of it, that would not bode well for them.
How is the coronavirus affecting divorced families? That's what we're going to ask the lawyer today on this episode. Hi, everybody. I'm Rob Rosenthal with AskTheLawyers.com, and my guest is New York City divorce and family law attorney Chaim Steinberger. Chaim, thank you for making some time to answer our questions today.
It's always my pleasure to be with you, Rob.
So I think this may not be a connection. Most people immediately think of divorce and the coronavirus. Why is that connected? Tell us about that.
So a number of different ways that they can be connected. The first one is when a parent who's a non-custodial parent has a child support obligation, he gets laid off from his work, he's got to make sure that he goes into court and makes a downward modification petition so that he doesn't get hung up in that. Then, as reported in the popular press recently, some people are using the coronavirus, the pandemic, as a reason to withhold their children from the other parent, and that's a more difficult issue.
So that's in contrast to court orders. They're not allowing visitation. Tell us more about that.
Well, even if there is a court order, so some states, there are shelter-in-place orders in so many states now. Some states have specifically excluded a court order travel. So visitation from one parent taking a child from one parent to the other would therefore be exempt from the shelter-in-place order, and that's specifically permitted. Even in those states like in New York where there is no explicit exemption from the shelter-in-place, I would argue that a court order that requires a transfer of children, that it should be complied with, even in the pandemic. Now, of course, the pandemic raises issues. You're, in effect, commingling both families. And so the least restrictive, you know how they say that a chain is as strong as its weakest link? Whichever family is least restrictive in their social distancing policy and their quarantining policy, in effect, you bring the germs in not only to that family, but to both families. So that can give rise to legitimate concerns. Sometimes the concerns aren't legitimate. Sometimes parents just use this as a means of, shall we call it profiteering, of trying to take advantage of a national health crisis to deny the other parent. And courts will not look kindly upon that. Sometimes, though, a parent is legitimately afraid. If one spouse keeps a very tightly controlled and quarantined family, and the other spouse completely disregards the quarantine, the parent who is quarantining could have legitimate fears. And so it probably makes sense for both parents. The best of all worlds would be if both parents get together and together they decide what is reasonable. Here's what our health authorities say. Here's what our leaders, the governor, the judges, the doctor in charge, New York State Health Department doctor says this is what we should be doing. I imagine that both parents, if they're operating in good faith, they could both agree that adhering to those standards would be in the best interest of the children. And if one parent doesn't want to adhere to those standards, the other parent might have a very good reason to say, okay, but then the children shouldn't stay with you if you're not adhering to the governmental standards that the government has determined is right to maintain the safety and integrity of our communities.
So I think one key there, Chaim, is you said if they're operating in good faith. Let's say they're not operating in good faith. If one parent feels like the other parent is using this as an excuse to avoid visitation, what does that parent do? What's the recourse?
So that's always problematic. Everybody getting divorced, even where two people are a couple that each one is living with their own family and they get together, these issues can be problematic. What standards do you have in your home? What standards do I have in my home? Are my children comfortable if you have older children coming over to your home? Are your children comfortable if you come over to my home? So these are difficult issues even when people are together and they have good feelings, goodwill towards one another. Imagine how much worse it is when people might be feeling antipathy towards one another. They're exes, they're divorced, they've broken up, and they don't trust one another. And so, and unfortunately, most people going through this, whenever people walk into my door for the first time, they're always fire and brimstone against the other one. And often it makes sense to realize that the other person is operating in good faith. They're just doing what they think is right. It's more often the result of what people believe and what they think and what they understand than the facts as they know them. So this, Rahm Emanuel, some attribute this to Winston Churchill, said, never let a good crisis go to waste. Parents can use this popular pandemic, this unfortunate national tragedy and this pandemic as a means of establishing a relationship, of starting to build the trust. And so you can't reach a global resolution of everything you need to do immediately and resolve it all. And the more stressed people are, the less able they are to take it in a slow manner. I teach people in my negotiation classes, never wait for the last minute to negotiate something. The more time you have, the more relaxed you can be. When you're relaxed, you can work something out. So you can use this pandemic as a means of starting to build that trust, of saying, what's really bothering you? What are you looking for? What are your standards? If I make sure that nobody in my family goes out, let's say I keep my family quarantined for 14 days and everybody's healthy, nobody has temperature, will you feel comfortable sending Joey over to me then? And maybe you can find standards so that people can make these little accommodations slowly. This is one of the reasons that mediation is so powerful and so successful, is because you start to build little, you build a consensus on little issues, and people start to realize, oh wait, the other person, maybe they are negotiating in good faith from their point of view. And so if you can start to build these little successes, that can then pave the way for a future relationship where you can be long-term working together in the best interests of your children. Look, we're all scared of the coronavirus. Both parents love their children. You can use the common threat and the common love for the children as a means to start building that better relationship going forward.
Might there be a situation, Chaim, even if everybody wants to try and work together, or at least says they do, where you might need to get an attorney involved, a mediator, somebody to help you work through this?
Of course. Unfortunately, sometimes people do abuse their children and try to use their children as pawns to hurt the other side or prevent the other side. And people often, I don't want to say in good faith, believe my children are better off without their other parent. The newspaper reported a case where a mother didn't want to let the children go to her ex because her elderly mother would come over to visit. And by letting the children go see the ex, they were putting the grandmother at risk. And I can't imagine for the life of me why she believed that the grandmother's relationship with the children was more important than the father's relationship to the children. So people have these, sometimes you need to explain it to them. A mediator may be great. Unfortunately, the courts are closed. They're not accepting filings except for things deemed to be essential matters. So if your category of dispute is not one of them. Sometimes withholding visitation could be considered an essential matter. I've heard of cases around the country where judges have taken up. The issue becomes even more complicated when an ex maybe is an ambulance driver, is a doctor, is a nurse in a hospital, on the front lines of corona. Now, of course, we need these people. They're saving, they're protecting the rest of us. To punish them by not seeing the children would be unfair. But on the other hand, the parent has a legitimate interest in protecting their children. How do we create a way that people who are sacrificing themselves for the care of the rest of the community aren't penalized for it? These are difficult issues, and parents should remember that the pandemic will come to an end, and everything they do during this time will be reviewed. It will be brought to a court's attention. And I've got to tell you, I've got to imagine that if a court thinks that one parent was trying to use the system and play off of it, that would not bode well for them. I can very well see that judges would come down hard on such parents, and maybe a parent might even lose custody. If they're willing to use their children as a pawn and they're not negotiating in good faith and they're not trying to make reasonable accommodations to the other parent, a judge may say you're not a worthy parent. You showed, if one parent is going out and they're not adhering to social distancing policies, but yet they don't want to allow the other parent in, judge may say, look, you put your children at risk by not adhering to the social distancing, and you showed that you don't care about the best interests of the children. You are willing to deny them the other parent just so that you can achieve a cheap political point. And I've got to imagine that judges will look very harshly on such behavior.
Chaim, just a fascinating topic, very interesting information. Thank you for taking some time to help us today. I appreciate it.
You're very welcome. I appreciate you getting the message out, Rob.
That's going to do it for this episode of Ask the Lawyer. My guest has been New York City attorney Chaim Steinberger. If you'd like the best information or you're ready to choose a lawyer that lawyers choose, make sure to go to askthelawyer.com. Also, please take a sec to like, share, and subscribe by clicking the button below. Thanks for watching. I'm Rob Rosenthal with AskTheLawyers.com.